I, for one, had no idea how much effort went into just creating these meetings, so thanks for that. And let's continue. The first item on our agenda today is apologies for absence. Do we have any?
Thank you, Chair. We've got apologies from Councillor Cecile Wright.
Thank you.
Yeah, Councillor Smale.
Any more apologies? Thank you. Item number 2, late items introduced by the Chair. There is just one minor technical detail that there will be a little revision in the agenda today. Item number 15 will come before items 13 and 14 so that it can be dealt with in public. Item number 3, declarations of interest. Are there any? Thank you. Moving on then, item number 4 is to review and approve the minutes of the meeting on the 11th of June. Moved and seconded. Oh, that's a query. Okay, Mr. Webster, yeah.
Just to say, I did attend, and my apologies as well, as I couldn't make it that day.
Thanks, we can note that in the record. Okay, any objections then, or we'll accept those as prepared and read. Thank you. Item number 5 then is to review the log of outstanding resolutions. Does anybody have any queries or comments on the outstanding resolutions log?
Just one question. There's an item where we've got to choose between a date for training, and I wonder whether we're going to do that now or later, which is on page 23, I think.
It is, you're right. I suspect in open committee that would be a nightmare. Can we deal with it offline? Yeah, thank you for raising it. Any other queries on the outstanding resolutions log? Great, thanks, members. Item number 6 then, an update from external audit. So we're happy once again to have Mark with us. Thank you for coming.
Yeah, so I'll try and keep this simple, and I'll emphasise the try. So we have had the guidance issued by the National Audit Office on rebuilding assurance and what that means in terms of your previously disclaimed financial statements. And that was issued at the end of June of this year. And our team have taken that guidance and produced our own internal interpretation of that guidance on how to apply it going forwards. And we're working through that at the moment. Stage 1 of that is called a risk assessment. And the risk assessment is there designed to determine whether or not what's called, what I will call a simplified method can be applied at the authority or not. Because we are still required to comply with all relevant auditing standards. So stage 1 is a risk assessment. That risk assessment isn't short. It takes a lot of things into consideration. Those things start at I'll call them an entity level risk assessment. And the factors that would go into that include things such as complexity of your financial statements. So whether you've got group accounts, which just increase the complexity of those, the kind of transactions balances that underpin the financial statements, and whether those are complex or not. There is also consideration on the number of years in which have been disclaimed previously. Because the more number of years that have been disclaimed, the more number of years that we don't have assurance to come through. So those are all key factors that go into it. That risk assessment then determines what kind of approach you can take at a macro level. You then drill down to individual balances. So perform another kind of risk assessment on a balance by balance basis. There are approximately, well, you end up in a scale of low risk to high risk, for want of a better determination. Now, the guidance notes, which are available on the National Audit Office website, a low risk entity is typically one that's had maybe one perhaps 2 years disclaimed. It's a really stable finance team, doesn't have any financial pressures. There's never, the previous audit that was issued when it was clean was a clean one, no control findings, etc. And then it moves up in scale into, taking into account all of those things I've talked about, with the most extreme examples being, significant change, ultimate reliance on exceptional financial support, poor control environment, head of internal audit opinion saying everything's awful, and even the 151 saying I'm not even signing off these financial statements because I don't trust them enough. So we are completing that risk assessment at this point in time. If you end up in a low risk, we apply something called, I think it's called the proof in total concept. The proof in total concept essentially says, if we can audit the top half of the balance sheet, which is kind of your fixed assets, debtors, creditors, liabilities like pension liabilities, PFI liabilities, etc., we would be able to have assurance on the opening balances on the reserves, because it's the reserves that are really complex. So that's what they say. There is then something called proof in total plus, which might mean we could audit some of those, but actually we would still need to do some further work around adjustments. For example, what you don't get in the balance sheet is use of capital, revenue expenditure funded by capital under statute. So there are certain transactions that can be adjusted that affect the reserves only but don't appear in the top half of the balance sheet. So we'd have to go through that process of whether we need to do additional work on that. And then you audit your in-year transactions, income and expenditure, and your closing balance sheet to get to a place of which, in that situation, you would go from disclaimed to qualified. Now, I know I will pause on that bit because qualified sounds worse than disclaimed, but it isn't. Okay, so disclaimed is down at the bottom, qualified, and then clean if you were to do it in that way. So we're going to complete that process. What I can't tell you is how long it would take to go from disclaimed to qualified to clean because of the nature of the risk assessment. Okay, so again, I repeat, the complexity of the council, the number of years that have not been audited will all go into that process. So how long, so if you have a question of how long it will take to get to that bit, I can't tell you now, but what I can tell you is I had a brief conversation with the finance team yesterday. I'm going to talk to the finance team as we complete this risk assessment and agree with them that profile, and then we'll come back to you and say, this is the timeline, assuming everything goes according to plan and we don't have problems, etc. But this is the timeline that would get you to that place. So I'll pause at that point because I appreciate that's the nuts and bolts of it. We are still going to be carrying out work on your 24-25 accounts. Still going to be doing some work on that because that helps us going forwards. But it would be, obviously, I would never presuppose what opinion I'm going to give you because we haven't even started the work yet. But for me, it's really key that we just manage your expectations that it's going to take time. The takeaway bit would be, we do know what we're doing, and we will be talking with your finance team to work and manage that process through. But please don't expect everything to become clean in an instant. It's going to take time.
Okay, thank you. I can hear the tempered frustration in your voice. Members, Councillor Kerr.
Can I just clarify how many years you need to go back and apply this process to? And do we have any idea about what the cost is going to be? Are we getting any grants towards that cost?
So in terms of years that we need to go back, we need to consider since the date of the last clean opinion. Okay, so we need to consider that. It doesn't necessarily mean we're going to go back and test all of those previous ones. We have to do the risk assessment first. Okay, so I don't want to speculate on the volume of work that we need to do. There is grant funding to cover the additional costs. I must admit, I don't know how much is, I think it's been allocated out. I don't know what the amounts are, but equally I can't tell you what the cost is going to be because we haven't started that process yet. And
Just for clarity, does that mean there's grant funding available or secured? I don't need to know the amount.
I think it's been secured. I think it's all been, I don't know if the cash has gone out or not, but it's...
We have received some monies this financial year. I'm just trying to get the figure. I think it was in excess of 100,000 because it's based on the number of disclaimed opinions that you've got. With us having 3, we were at the top end of the threshold for the grant that was allocated. Obviously, we don't know the costs from Mazars, but yes, we have been getting contributions.
Thank you. Councillor Kerr, is there any more? Councillor Wright?
I take your point that you've got no idea of the timescales yet, but we're going through a process of local government reorganisation with other authorities in this area that are likely to have similar issues, and obviously this is going to be a key issue for actually bringing those authorities together. So do you anticipate it's going to have some impact, I suspect, but do you anticipate we're going to resolve this before the new authorities are actually put in place, or is it going to be one of those things we're going to have to live with throughout the transition?
So I could not openly give you any clarity. I couldn't tell you because I don't want to. I don't want to say yes and then it not happen. And I don't want to say no and then it will happen. What I will say is obviously we do know about local government reorganisation. We do know about the time frame. We do know, and having done this kind of work before, what the implications are in the formation of a new organisation and the need to have a robust opening position to essentially inform the spending plans and the financial sustainability of the new organisation. So that's as far as I will go on that point for the purposes
yes,
of
I suppose
the
my
committee.
next question is, once you actually get to the stage where you've got a clearer picture on the timescales, you'll then be in a better position to let us know what the risks are should it impact on local government and what those risks are.
Yes. Yeah.
Mr. Sunderland.
Just for clarity, so the risk assessment has to be done for each financial year separately, or does it across the board?
It's holistic on the current years, on the 24-25 financial statements reflecting opening balances.
Right. So having done that, you come up with a risk assessment as to where you fall within the thing. And this has got to be done for all authorities, not just Derby, obviously, I guess. Having then assessed our position, are you going to, in practical terms, start working on the low-risk ones first or the high-risk ones first? Or have you not decided as a firm to how to do that?
No, that's a very good point. So we are looking at again, I'm trying not to use a risk assessment again. We are categorising authorities into certain areas, into those that would be. So if an organisation had a clean opinion last year and a clean opinion this year, we know we can get to, with the very short timetable we have until February, given the guidance only came out in the end of June, we want to really focus on those. In terms of those that received a disclaimed opinion, there is a classification process to go through, particularly those that have connotations across the wider scope. So, for example, pension funds become quite important because if we hold up the pension funds, that has a cascade across all local authorities within that area. And then we do then categorise into readiness. So if an organisation has not produced any financial statements for us to audit on time, then our ability to rebuild assurance becomes a greater risk.
Well, clearly a risk.
And then and then there's our resource constraints that sit in that as well. So,
Balancing out, didn't they?
yeah, because we can only do so much by the end of February. Now, again, part of that risk assessment, your authority has produced its financial statements on time every single year, so we do recognise that. The last opinion was clean. Sorry, the last opinion that was issued, complete, was clean.
It was clean, yeah.
Heads of internal audit opinion have come out, again, I'm not trying to mix words, but clean.
Yeah, indeed, yeah.
Our VFM conclusion that we did on 23-24 and issued in February was clean, again, clean. So you don't sit in the awful case. When I say awful, I mean, I'll go complex, really horrible, difficult kind of situation. It kind of fits somewhere in between. So our process is, our focus is what can we physically do, and how does that affect the rebuilding assurance over time? So I know that's a bit of a longer answer. But
No, I fully understand. Because quite clearly, just from my point of view, we seem to be in a lower risk. Whether we're in the low risk, another matter entirely. I don't know what the full constraints. So, is there anything which we can do as an authority to enhance the help to aid this movement, either in terms of speeding it up a bit or to reduce the overall costs? Is there anything which we can do which would help in this regard?
So what I'd say, I had a good conversation with the finance team yesterday, and they're fully supportive, helpful, and prepared to support us doing the work that we need to do. There isn't anything additional at this point. It really will be the outcome of the risk assessment, because if that points in the direction of what I call the simplistic method, we can get there obviously quicker. If it points in the direction of this is going to take a lot longer time, then we just need to reshuffle that programme.
Clearly, we've had a set of accounts issued fairly promptly, or each of the last 3-4 years, whatever. That's not been an issue for a number of years. So obviously, from that point of view, from my point, as I see it, things have been moving on. Sorry, Alison, you want to stay? So that was really where I was coming from, because my thoughts is that we seem to be low risk, but obviously there's more to it than I can work out, because obviously I haven't seen the detail. You have. So in terms of moving forwards, anything that we can do, we will do, I imagine.
Thanks. Alison, do you want to respond?
Yeah, just into response really in some of those comments. I mean, I think we might be at the higher end of the risks, but I will let Mark do his work just based on some of the criteria, 3 disclaimed opinions, complex accounts, we've got an ALMO, there's a whole raft of things. So I think there's going to be an intense piece of work to get us to that clean position. I'm not being too naive about that. And then we just need to understand the impact that it will have on the finance teams in terms of resourcing that. It will be huge, and it will put us into a state of constant audit, I suspect, for a number of years. And we need to manage that along with external audit to make sure, not just in terms of Mazar's resourcing that, but also in terms of our finance team, because it's the same people that will do the strategic budget planning, that do the close of accounts. It has a massive impact. So it is a concern, and it's really disappointing to be in this position, considering that we have issued all of our accounts on time. We've done everything that we can to avoid being in this position, and I will say it publicly, Mark won't. It's not his position to do that, but being let down by previous external audit firms has got us into this position.
So is there anything which do you feel adequately resourced in terms of your financial team? Is there anything that the organisation should do to enhance that thing? Because obviously we don't want people working ridiculous hours. We don't want people sort of burning out, because if they start working ridiculous hours, they're going to start making mistakes. It's inevitable. I'm not suggesting they will, but
I think that's why we've got to work with Mark and his team to understand what that plan looks like and what we can also resource from our side as well as from the audit team.
And is there anything the audit committee needs to do to understand this? Is there anything we need to do? I can't think of it, but
I can't think of anything in the terms of reference. The audit risk and the resource risk, they're appropriately recorded in risk logs. Okay, thank you. I think we're still on external audit update. Does anybody else have any queries or comments? If not, the recommendation is to note the report. If we're all happy with that, we can move on. Thank you very much.
Yeah, we will be performing work, and I apologise, I can't remember when your next committee is, but you will get a written report next time. We'll give the summation of everything.
Moving on then, members, the next item on the agenda is the Risk Assurance Annual Report for 24-25.
Thank you,
We've
Chair.
had copies in advance, and we have a presenter. Catherine's going to take us through it. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm pleased to present the 23-24 year-end risk assurance report. So this brings together a summary of activities that have taken place over the last 6 months of 24-25 and sets out proposals for risk actions in 25-26. For a full overview of risk assurance activities in 24-25, this report should be considered alongside the reports presented on the mid-year review in January and the risk strategy and handbook refresh in March. In January, this committee made a number of recommendations to strengthen routine risk assurance reports, which have been reflected within this report. So those included reference to PARS, our performance and risk system. So this is noted in the monitoring, reporting and reviewing risk progress in paragraph 4.4 of the report. The recommendation to include the risk target score. This has been reflected in the risk management strategy and handbook alongside our risk templates. Now, this is going to be included from June 2025 onwards, prioritising strategic risks for initial implementation, so you won't see that included in this report this time. And then a recommendation to review the health, wellbeing and sickness-related absence risk, and a deep dive took place of that, led by CLT and Cabinet at the end of 24-25. The report also identifies 2 risks and 1 risk theme for targeted risk review activities for in-depth review in 25-26 to ensure that risks are appropriately identified and defined. And these are our effective contract management risk, our compliance with ICO recommendation risk, and to ensure consistent application and use of the risk target scores. Just to summarise, recommendations of the report are to note the progress made from the mid-year position, which is presented in paragraph 4.4, to note the latest assurance overview completed on risks within the Strategic Risk Register, which is in Appendix 1, and the recommendations for targeted risk assurance activities during this year, paragraph 4.7. I'm happy to take any comments or questions.
Thank you. And a good report again, and further evidence of the maturing team. So thanks for that. Members, do we have any queries or comments? Councillor Wright.
Yeah, first of all, I mean, I agree with your point. There's a lot of progress being made, and a first point is I appreciate the effort put in by your team and obviously all of the senior leadership team and departmental head look at these reports on a number of occasions. But one thing I wanted to point out and just make an observation and then a question, the strategic risk 15 and 16, which basically talk around finance and the future viability of the council. I'm just wondering whether, in light of recent events and future events, whether that needs to, seems to be a lot of backward looking, like COVID's still in there, and I would argue, you know, that there obviously is still an impact on COVID, but I wouldn't have thought it's a major one. But when you look at our next item on the agenda is the annual performance report, and there's some very worrying indicators in that report around employment levels, like percentage of young people who are not in education, that's deteriorating, youth claimant count deteriorating, claimant count deteriorating. When you combine that with the fact that unemployment's been rising over the current months, and I can't see that changing anytime soon, you know, that's going to potentially have an impact across a broad range of issues, both from a revenue and expenditure perspective. And looking back to last budget, I felt as though, the government's decision to increase national employment contribution for employers gave us some implications that we weren't fully aware of and weren't able to plan. I think we can be fairly certain that in the next budget there are going to be tax increases, which again are going to not only impact on delivery of council services, the ability of our residents to pay, but will probably have an impact on the decision of this council whether things like the precept should rise fully. So my question is, I don't think we could wait till the next audit committee to actually, do we need to do anything in relation to this, a resolution of this group? I'm not sure, and I'd be interested in Alison's view on this, whether this has been factored in and whether we ought to be tweaking these risks to make them more pertinent to what's happening, but also whether, I suspect, discussions have already been considered both in your team and the senior leadership team, but if they have, they're obviously opaque to councillors like myself. So I suppose the question is, without waiting for a next audit committee, is this a risk that the committee thinks ought to be looked at again in light of the deteriorating issues around employment within the city? And if so, is it something we should ask the chief exec, for example, to consider as part of those senior leadership considerations, rather than waiting for an audit committee, or ask executive scrutiny, for example, to look at it? I hope that all makes sense.
Yes, thanks, Councillor Wright. Is that a Catherine or an Alison response?
I'll do my best to kind of cover what I can of that, and then I'll let Alison mop up if I miss anything. But in terms of the reporting, there is obviously a lag with when this report comes. The element of including things around COVID in those risks have been reviewed very recently with the risk updaters and owner. And the decision was made to keep those elements in there because there are still implications to the budgets around how, we had grants and whatnot, bits and pieces. In terms of the impact on our wider organisation, obviously we can bring this to the Corporate Risk Management Group, which is meeting in August, and raise it as an emerging risk. But these elements are quite interlinked. I think realistically, I'm not sure if Alison would agree with me, that these two are very sort of inward-looking financial risks to us rather than what we can do for the city. I don't know whether you feel we need something different around that, Alison, if you wanted to come in on that.
And obviously, it still continues to be a big risk, and I think it's scored as that basis in the reports. And I think there's an opportunity as well for councillors, for yourselves to keep up to date with that in between audit committees as well, because the finance and performance reports get taken to Cabinet on a quarterly basis, which then gives an opportunity then for, as you said, exec scrutiny and yourselves to become more involved and more up to date in some of those. So yes, those conversations are happening, Councillor Wright, as you would imagine them to be doing, particularly around impact for budgets for next year. But yeah, we will be reporting those quarterly during the year as well.
Thanks. It's clearly from our terms of reference, we are more of a reactive committee, but I do think there's merit in highlighting the situation to scrutiny, who could take a more proactive approach. Perhaps we could do that through member services. Yeah,
I suppose my specific question is all the risk indicators around employment that are coming through the performance report translated into the discussions. I understand. I do listen, and on executive scrutiny, I've not heard this particular issue raised at all. If you're assuring me that yes, it is, and it's one that because I can see it rippling across all sorts of areas of our business. If the trend continues as it's looked, combined with the impact of potential increases in taxation. It's going to give a lot of people cause for concern, but also as a council cause for concern. So But I do recognise that just as a member of executive scrutiny, not having any discussions as Cabinet would have, for example, that this all might be happening below the waterline, but you know it will come out at when we actually budget time and following the budget. So I would certainly think it's something executive scrutiny or one of these other scrutiny boards ought to have in its view. But again, I also recognise I'm just one councillor on this group, and if those concerns aren't reflected by other councillors, then you know I'm happy to go along with what the committee thinks.
I'd back you up, Councillor Wright, with the route of least resistance. You say one member of one group, but you're a member of both groups, which is a unique identity and opportunity for you to represent the matter in both groups. So perhaps that's our route of least resistance. But if not, we can work with member services to have it added to perhaps one of their future agendas. I do agree it should be highlighted. Whether you want to do that yourself or whether you want to do it as a committee, you've got my backing as a committee, and unless there's any objections from the committee.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to do it myself, but I'd be interested if those concerns have got any resonance with other committee members.
In the absence of objections, represent the committee on it. Councillor Kerr.
The new chair of Exec Scrutiny was looking to be a bit more proactive as a committee, or a board, I can't remember. And it may be something that he, I think, would be interested to take on. So can I suggest that maybe an informal conversation with the chair first, and then with the nominal support of Audit and Governance?
Yeah.
It's a good suggestion. I'd support that. Focusing in on our risk register, it might be that comes back to us at some point, but for now, I think the correct home for that would be executive scrutiny. Councillor Kerr.
Thank you. I just want to ask about process. We've got two new risks added in here: organisational capacity to respond to ICO audit recommendations, and the local government reorganisation, which is also an opportunity. And both have 2 actions in place and a number of controls. And I just wonder whether, you know, we've got a 12 and a 16 in there, which are both there in red. And I was just wanting to know whether there was anything else happening as well as what's there, whether there's work going on to look at how that high-level risk is, in both cases, is being mitigated.
I mean, the risks are being looked at quarterly as part of our strategic risk reporting, so they're reviewed with the risk updaters and risk owners. The ICO risk is also going to the Information Governance Board on a monthly basis as part of their agenda, because the action plan ties into what they're doing at that. LGR, obviously there are lots of conversations happening in the organisation which are being tied into that risk. But the sort of what you will see reporting wise is what's coming through in the performance report quarterly to Cabinet.
My hope is therefore that when we see this again, there will have been some progress, and maybe there will be some other mitigations in place, and the assessment will be maybe slightly lower. Is that too optimistic?
I'll just jump in. That's the ambition, as Catherine said. You know, the relevant boards are picking up these issues, but there are also regular conversations across the corporate leadership team, particularly in terms of the ICO. In terms of resources in that, additional investment has been made to be able to increase that capacity, to be able to make us immediately respond to that for the next review by the ICO when they come to re-audit that. So, yes, I would expect to see some progress made at the next report.
Thank you. Do you have a point to raise?
Just on page 31, the about monitoring, review and recording risks. Risk management training was delivered in April. Only 14 councillors attended. is that satisfactory that only 27% of the councillors here attended the risk management training? Is there should it be expanded and made much more critical that they do attend these things? Should we be naming names of those who don't attend? Mind you, an awfully long list at the moment, but it doesn't seem to me to be enough of the people involved, and I think it ought to be stressed that it is a bit more. It's not just an optional training; it's a compulsory training almost.
We need to ask ourselves before we make it compulsory what risk it is that we're mitigating in doing so. But Catherine, do you have a response?
I just wanted to add for a bit of context that previously we've only had 2 councillors turn up when we've done it. So actually 14 was a win for us. So we were pretty pleased with that. Obviously it is optional. We do our best to work with democratic services to make sure things are timetabled in a time that it works for as many people as possible. But we shared things outside of that training, like follow-up slides afterwards. So we've done our best to work around that. But yes, 14 was actually, in the context of previous training, a bit of a win for us.
I mean, it's not really your problem, it's the councillor's problem, my point of view. You're doing your best.
Thank you, Chair. Just on the training point, we've always struggled a bit here getting training schedule, I think. And don't forget the co-opted members. I think it'd be great for us to be able to attend things that are designed for councillors that impact on this committee, because sometimes we struggle to get training sorted here. So that's just a request for the future, if that's okay.
Yeah.
It's an interesting logistical problem for member services, but I'll leave it with them.
Yeah.
That's a good point, thank you.
Thank you. And the final point is quite a minor point, but I've mentioned it before. On page 3 of your report, which is page 30 of the pack, just the risk appetite comment that's made down on the table. The risk appetite, they're not a key decision and do not need approval. I'm not sure that's great practice, that risk appetite shouldn't be approved. I'm not saying it should be approved here. I'm not saying where it should be approved, but I think risk appetite is quite an important pillar which a lot of things flow out from, and to have a statement that we don't approve those things doesn't sit comfortably with me, to be honest.
It's a good spot. I'd like to suggest perhaps that risks of a certain grade are approved rather than all of them in terms of target appetite.
Yeah, that is what I was going to ask back. Is it the target score that you want approving, or is it the boundaries of the target scores that the risk appetite scores that you would be looking at?
Yeah, it's the boundaries, really. I think it's that sort of it's the overall statement that articulates what level of risk we're comfortable as an organisation to take on. So it's the framework, it's the big picture rather than minutiae.
So the framework, so the risk appetite sits within the wider risk management framework, and part of the refresh that came in March, the risk appetites were reviewed by CLT, councillors were invited, there were surveys sent around to all senior leaders, heads of service, managers within the organisation. So in terms of stakeholder engagement, it's not just coming from the assurance team, it's coming from the organisational point of view. The risk handbook, that framework coming to the Audit and Governance Committee in March, that's the point where we can have those conversations. So they've been reviewed as part of that framework for the next 3 years and will continue to be reviewed. But it is definitely something I would love more engagement with. But it's also quite a difficult thing, I would say, to get perfectly pinned down. We don't work in some of our risks are not just financial, where it's easy to go the boundaries here, we're outside of it, we're not in it. So we have to kind of have some context that's not just that number, as it were. So from my point of view, we do consult and engage, but there's nothing within the framework that says we have to have those agreed. They are agreed by coming through and being approved in that process.
I think that stakeholder engagement is admirable. I think that I'm sympathetic to the point where director level sponsorship of the guardrails might be appropriate. And that the guardrails are indeed the foundation that keeps the whole train on the track. So I agree with the importance of that. How that's done, I can leave with you and your team. But I think it's a good point, and you've noted the point. So thank you, Councillor Kerr.
It's early days yet, but I just wondered whether conversations have begun with other likely partner local authorities after local government reorganisation on risks and appetites.
Not with myself directly, but I believe as part of Heather's role, Heather Greenan, as Director of Corporate Management, I believe those sorts of conversations are happening at her level.
Any more comments or questions, members? If not, then the recommendation is to note the progress made from the mid-year position and to note the latest assurance overview. Sure.
Thank you, members. Can I just check for the action log whether you would like your decision today to record the fact that a point had been raised around the boundaries and that you've asked officers to go away, and I can't remember exactly the phrase you used, Councillor Morgan, again, but it was to ask Catherine and colleagues to look at the appropriate ways for those to be approved, or was that would you prefer that not to be an action put into the?
So rephrased, I guess the question is, do we want that to come back to this committee to ensure it's been done? Personally, I'm happy to trust the risk team with the.
Thank you.
I'm happy to leave it with the risk team rather than record it as a formal resolution at this stage. Councillor Kerr?
The action that I had picked up was to make sure that independent members are also invited to relevant councillor training, and that wouldn't just be independent members here, because I think there are some other independent members on, for example, CYP scrutiny.
Yeah, we've captured that one, haven't we, Jack? Yeah, thank you. Thanks. Okay, unless there are any objections, then we will note the progress as per the agenda. Thanks, members. And thank you. Okay, moving on. The next item on the agenda is number 8, which is the review of performance for 24-25. Members have had a copy.
That's also me.
And Catherine's also going to present to us on that.
Yeah, I am bringing this on behalf of the team today, so I will say at the start of this that if there are any questions or comments around this item, then I will need to take them away rather than answer them to the committee today, just to make you aware. So I'm pleased to present the 24-25 annual report. It brings together a summary of what we've delivered over the last 12 months, in line with a summary of our revenue and capital spend, demonstrating the value for money that we deliver. It's intended to be summative, bringing out highlights from our performance monitoring reports that have been presented quarterly throughout the year. Whilst there's no statutory duty to publish an annual report, it is good practice to do so, and we have historically. There are 2 parts to the report. So a high-level summary, which is in Appendix 1, and an at-a-glance summary of all the commitments from the 24-25 Council Delivery Plan, alongside the strategic risks at the end of March 2025, recognising that these are dynamic and have changed throughout the year, and they're in Appendix 2. It's worth noting there was a lot of discussion on the Q4 monitoring report at executive scrutiny in June, but there have been no substantial changes from that which was reported then. This report does offer us an opportunity to reflect on the many achievements of our colleagues and partners over the last year. There is a lot to celebrate and be proud of, and the the annual general report will be published on the website by the end of August 2025. Thank you.
Any comments or queries, members? Councillor Kerr.
I recognise that you may not have an answer, but on the 2024 performance highlights in Appendix 1, it refers to responded to 112 complaints, 944 stage 1 and 68 stage 2. I just wondered which complaint processes that refers to, or whether it's all complaint processes. I thought a bit of clarity would be helpful, and the space there to add a few more words.
I will take that away and find out for you.
Thank you.
Councillor Wright.
Yeah, I've got a similar query. Well, first of all, I think it's worth noting that there's a lot of progress and it covers a wide range of areas and a lot of performance indicators, and there's a lot of, you know, as your introduction, a lot of success. One thing I didn't find congruent, though, is that under digital and organisational transformation, average working days per employee for the 24, 25 and then the last quarter are going upwards significantly against a target of 10.5 days. And as this is one of the key measures of productivity in the organisation, it would seem to me that's a real cause for concern. Now, I do recognise this as last year's performance and things may have transformed in the first half of this year. But when you actually look at the risks, really, and I know the senior leadership team tells us that they've been through this time and time again, so there may be a lot of remedial action in place, but it doesn't seem congruent in terms of, you know, what the risk assessment's saying, which is things like it's a risk, but it's being managed appropriately, and we've got this steep increase in one of the major indicators of productivity.
I can add a little bit of context to that. So there is a working group in place around employee sickness, well-being. We're looking at that as a key area of risk. Obviously, this is a public-facing report, so the level of detail we go into is not as high. The detail behind each of those sits in the quarterly reports that come through to Cabinet on that quarterly basis. So yes, there's that element of triangulation missing, but it's probably for the context of the wider audience that this report is aimed at. But yeah, absolutely a good point to kind of make sure we're joining those things up, and I'll feed that back to the team.
Just a quick query from me. If I were a common person on the street and I wandered in and picked a report up, I'd be expecting to see a little bit more about the investment in AI than a brief comment on page 15, where it's literally just a thing that exists rather than a good thing or a challenge or an opportunity. It's just mentioned very briefly in one paragraph as a thing that is happening. So perhaps we could fly that flag a bit with a bit more pride. I'm not sure. That's just something to think about.
Yeah, I'll feed that back to the team. Thank you.
Thanks.
Just a small thing, really. You've got your complaints down there. Do you ever get any commendations or positive comments? And if so, maybe you don't get any. I don't know, but if you do, perhaps you ought to reflect those as well. Just something for the future, really.
I'll let the performance team know.
That's another good point, thank you. Anything else, members, on this? There are two points to this report. Are there any other queries or comments on the second part? Appendix 2. No, well, I won't force them. In that case, we can move on to the next part of the agenda. Catherine, are there any other parts of this agenda? Okay. Well, in which case, I'd just like to thank you. As a regular attendee of this meeting, members may know that this is Catherine's last appointment with us today, so thank you for everything and all the very best. The next item on this agenda then is item number 9, which is the Treasury Management Outturn Report. Is this yours, Alison? Thank you.
Thank you. We have got a presentation to support this, so Jack, are you just going to fire it up for me, please? Just while Jack's doing that, just to reflect on the conversation that we had around training for the co-opted members. We did some training last week for Treasury Management. Yes, but you were invited, so that's absolutely fine. I get that, but you were on the list, and I know a few of you did. So yeah. And for those of you who did attend, I hope you found it enlightening.
I was hoping it could be recorded when we could have played it back.
Our enclosed wouldn't let us do that. Will they allow us to share the slides? We can share the slides. There we go. Thank you, Jack. So this is to support the report, the Treasury Management Outturn report, which I always find it's probably a little bit easier to do a presentation on this because it's quite a complex subject matter. So the main detail are in the report, and it's in relation to our outturn, so that's as at the 31st of March 2025. So if you just go on to the first slide, please, Jack. So the Treasury Management Outturn report, as you know, outlines the Treasury Management activity for the past financial year. It will focus on the forecast outturn position for last year, provides a summary of the financial markets with interest and inflation rates, and at quarter four the base rate was 4.5%, most recent reviewed reduced 4.25. It identifies and outlines the borrowing activity and the investment activity, and the non-treasury investments, so that covers things like investment properties, regeneration loans, and the treasury performance, so the actual investments and borrowing against the forecast. The compliance report focused on compliance. There was no new breaches identified at quarter four. There was a breach that had previously been identified at quarter two for investment limits, but we'd already reported that to yourselves in terms of that half-yearly report. So if you just go on to the next slide, Jack, please. It identifies the Treasury Management outturn position. So this is our outturn position. It's a balanced position for 24-25 after using just over £1 million transferred from the Treasury Management Reserve, and that was planned in-year activity to manage the capital programme borrowing requirements. The reserve balance as of the 1st of April, just to put it into context, is 2.2 million. And that reserve is fully committed to support borrowing going forward to support that capital programme. Next slide, please. So for the prudential indicators and limits, as I said, all prudential indicators and limits are in line with the SIPA guidance and have been adhered to, so that hopefully gives committee some assurance. We did breach the maximum balance to be held within a local authority at quarter two, and there's some further details in 4.442 of the report. And we invested £10 million, and our investment limit was 7 million. So we breached that 7 million limit, but that was an opportunity to maximise surplus cash balances that had previously been reported to Audit and Government. So, as I said, just for assurance, those breaches were around about investments and monies held. It wasn't around breaches around limits of borrowing. So that takes on to the investment balances by a counterparty. So the council holds investment funds and it represents income received in advance of expenditure plus the balances of reserves held. And during the 12-month period to March 2025, the council's daily investment balance ranged between 17.8 million and 104 million. Due to timing differences between income and expenditure. So we always make maximum opportunities for any of those short-term cash balances that we hold to make sure that they're invested adequately and we get in the maximum return for those investments. More money was held in market funds at the year end due to the better investment rates that we got in there rather than the DMO. So that seems, you can see there the shift in where we've invested, whether it's the money market funds or the DMO. We always look to see where we get the best return because they have higher cash balances, again, due to income and expenditure. So the next slide looks at the investments per counterparty. Apologies, it is quite small, but as I said, the detail is in the report, and it provides a summary of our investments and which counterparty they're invested in. Local authority investment, Surrey County Council, just pick out there 5 million, and Manchester Combined Authority 3 million. We invest majority of our surplus cash spread across, but the spread risk across our investment portfolio, and we invest in the local authority, market and bank call accounts and the DMO. So it's always striking that balance between return but also managing risk as well. We don't have any long-term investments due to us being in a need to borrow position, so we can only invest monies on a short-term basis, and that's obviously following advice from our counterparties, all in close, that provide our treasury management advice. So the next slide looks at debt, the authorised limit and operational boundaries. So in summary, from that table, our borrowing debt, 577 million, long term is 500 million and short term 77 million. So we have had a spike recently in our short term debt, and that's in relation to managing our cash flow, and actually short term debt with the volatility of interest rates has been the advice of our advisors over recent years, not to tie too much money into higher interest bearing loans. Other liabilities total £81 million, so the total debt there you can see is 659 million as at the 31st of March 2025. The next slide looks at our debt and authorised limit and operational boundaries. The operational boundary limits can be breached, and therefore it's not counted as a compliance failure. The operation boundary limit for PFI and finance leases were exceeded due to the implementation of IFRS 16, which is new counting standards in relation to leases and how we account for leases. And they require the right use of leases to be brought onto the balance sheet, and that increased our debt liability as we accounted for those differently last financial year. In terms of capital financing requirement, the draft CFR was 862 million, and that's still being in draft as we come to finalise the statement of accounts. They're subject to audit opinions. And then the final slide looks at our borrowing, so under borrowing position. The council's in an under borrowed position at the time of reporting, and the under borrowed position is relatively the difference between the capital financing requirements, so that they're the loans that we need to finance our capital programme, and then the outstanding debt that we've got. And those that were on the training last week, we got some really interesting graphs that showed that, how we measure that under borrowed position. So thank you. That's the report. We're happy to take any questions.
Are there any questions? Councillor Kerr.
Can I just ask about the PFI situation? I know we've got PFIs for street lighting, and I think we're liability for some of the schools. I don't know if there's anything else. But they were for, I think, over 25 years. And some of those must be 20 years plus now.
Yes, you're right. I think first one...
Group schools and street lights.
Yeah, they're coming up in 3 years.
6 and 7.
Yes, between 5, 6 years. So the group schools and street lighting, the first ones that are coming up. So we have got, we are working on those. We do have a lot of work to determine what that close of that contract might look like, what the financial position is. So lots of work already going on ready for those PFI contracts. And yeah, time flies, doesn't it, to think that we're just coming towards the end of some of those. So yeah.
In broad terms, what happens at close of contract?
Yeah, there's lots of government guidance that's out on the exit of that. So I suppose you have to do an assessment of the asset and where the asset's going to transfer to, and what those liabilities. So it will be different for every single case of that. So we're working through that with the government guidance as well. But yeah, a lot of work that goes on towards that. Interestingly as well, for those PFI contracts that that have ended. There has been quite a lot of public litigation in those areas as well. So they are really, really complex pieces of work, which is why we're investing the resources to understand those implications for 5-6 years down the line.
Any more queries? Thank you. In that case, then, the recommendation is to note the Treasury Management outturn position and borrowing and investment activities compliance and the Treasury and non-Treasury prudential indicators as at the 31st of March, approved by Cabinet at its meeting the 9th of July. Unless there's any objections? Noted then. Thank you. Next item on the agenda is item number 10, which is the Internal Audit Progress Report. Hannah, would you like to give us an overview?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So I'm going to start with the progress on audit assignments table, which starts on page 4 of the report. So you'll be able to see for the 25-26 assignments, we've completed 3 short pieces of work, all of which relate to grant certification. So these aren't assurance-based audits, but they do consider the use of the grant monies against terms and conditions, which allows Audit and the Council to sign off the required returns to the relevant grant awarding bodies. And then looking at the brought forward assignment section, which is on page 5, there are a number of pieces of work that have been brought to conclusion since our last update to this committee. And obviously we're going to continue to work to make progress on the other brought forward pieces of work. I'm going to move on to the audit coverage section, which starts on page 7. So a committee can see that there's been a number of audits completed in the period. A lot of these have attracted either reasonable or substantial assurance ratings, and then there's some where they weren't assurance-based pieces of work, so we wouldn't give assurance level, hence those being marked as not applicable. So those are things like the grant certification work that I've just mentioned, or they might be consulting activities that were undertaken in the previous financial year that we've now drawn a line under. I'm not going to run through every single piece of completed audit work, but I will obviously be happy to take any questions if anyone does have any on those. What I wanted to do now, though, is focus in on the Transparency Code audit. This is set out on page 14. And I want to look at that because this is a limited assurance piece of work, and all of the issues we identified had been risk accepted by management. So obviously, I'm sure there's a lot of interest in that piece of work. So just to give a bit of context for those of you that aren't aware, Transparency Code sets out requirements for local government to publish certain data. So this can be things like expenditure that exceeds £500, procurement card transactions, certain procurement information, asset information, salary information of senior officers, etc. So we were obviously undertaking a piece of audit work to look at if the council were complying with that code. Those of you that sat on this committee for a long time may recall that we actually set out to undertake this piece of audit work as part of the 22-23 audit plan. And we actually started this audit back in July 2022. We issued the draft report in November 2022, and it's taken a lot of time and discussion with officers to get to the point where we could look to issue this final report, and ultimately we issued the final report in May this year. So in those discussions with officers, it was very clear to Audit that management understood the issues and that they acknowledged the risks that existed to the council in not fully complying with the code. We also saw a clear acknowledgement that there was an appetite to tackle these issues, so that appetite does exist. But what we couldn't arrive at was a clear set of tangible and smart actions that we could be putting forward as a way to improve the situation. So obviously, those of us in internal audit were concerned at how long this piece of audit work had been sat at that draft report stage. And obviously, we wanted to share information with this committee about what we'd found as part of that audit. We obviously wanted to be transparent with you about the state of play in this area. So we just didn't see the benefit in being sat there as a draft report any longer. So we obviously had discussions with the monitoring officer, and with her agreement, we decided to issue this final report with an acknowledgement that for now, the risks raised in this audit were being risk accepted. But they are risk accepted in the interim, while alternative solutions and actions to address the weaknesses raised in the report are developed and implemented. So that obviously means the council isn't saying that, you know, we're just going to live with this risk, case closed, let's move on. What they're saying is, yes, we do need to do better. We just need to work with the right officers to ensure we can get that compliance with the code, and that's going to take some time to coordinate and to get right. So in the meantime, the council is acknowledging that the risks are known, but they are being accepted. So what I want to do is just obviously assure this committee that it's my intention and the monitoring officer's intention to keep this as an area of regular communication. We're going to be discussing the development work in this area, and what I'd like to do is use internal audit as a resource to support, advise, assess these alternative actions that are being developed and that are hopefully going to be implemented. So my intention is to put some time aside in the audit plan to ensure this topic continues to stay on all of our radars. And obviously if I judge there to be insufficient progress in this area, then I'll come back to this committee and formally escalate at that point. But for now, what I'm saying is this is the state of play as at the time we did that work in July 2022. You obviously need to be aware of that. And there is a risk to the council, but we'll continue to obviously shine a light on it and look to push for improvements on it. Moving away from transparency code, but keeping with the theme of risk accepted issues, there have been a handful of other audits that have completed during the period where management have decided to risk accept some of the issues. The attendance management audit recommendation 2 highlighted an issue about responsiveness of the open text system at remote sites. Management risk accepted the issue. They felt that it wasn't related to the attendance management policy and that they had sufficient guidance available to officers to inform them about open text and what to do if they had issues with the system. So it wasn't necessarily something for corporate attention. Insurance claims handling, we did flag an issue about a review not having been completed since 2018 of the total value of insurance reserves. Management decided to accept the risk, citing that there was money in reserves, it couldn't be compromised, and it represented a reasonable and proportionate balance compared to the annual provision values that were transferred in each year. They also felt they'd got sufficient compensating controls to identify any emerging trends or issues that might change that situation. The commercialism audit, we did flag an issue with the terms of reference for the commercialism programme being overdue for review. And then on conclusion of the audit, management resolved to include the programme within the Efficiency and Innovation Board. So there were separate terms of reference for that particular board. So the commercialisation programme terms of reference were no longer needed. And then the key financial risk piece of work, we raised an issue with the timely completion and review of reconciliations. So just to stress, it's not that the reconciliations weren't being done, it's just that they weren't being done as promptly as you would have expected them to have been done. So we raised a recommendation about having some reminders to staff about this and trying to enforce that frequency a little bit better. Management felt that there were already sufficient processes in place to remind and discuss this issue with staff, so they didn't want to take any further action. I'm going to move away from those completed assignments into the recommendation tracking portion of the report, which starts on page 20. So as usual, we've got the summary tables, which set out the number of open recommendations and which state they were in, so whether that be action due, future action, etc. I would say that I think there's still quite a high number of open recommendations. It would be great if we could try and get these down. Internal audit obviously will continue to push for updates from officers, and we'll try and support the council in guiding officers on how they can better control the risks that we've identified in their service areas. But obviously we can't take the action for them, as I'm sure you all can appreciate. We have highlighted the 2 open significant risk issues that are 3 months over their original action date. So these are on page 25 and 26. Officers have been engaging with us on these, so that's not been an issue, but we're just not yet at a point where we can sign these off as implemented. There's also highlighted to you the moderate risk recommendations that are 6 months or more past their original action date. There's quite a few. I'm not going to necessarily pick on any of those to run through with you. I'm hoping that what we've put in the status update comments there is sufficient to keep the committee informed on where we are with those ones. But again, just want to echo what I'd said earlier. It would be great if some of these could be closed off. And obviously we'll continue to support the council in whatever way we can to make that happen. That's all I was going to say on the progress report, but I'm happy to take any questions if there are any.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Councillor Kerr.
Thank you. I was going to ask about the taxi licensing, where we've got a whole set of actions due. Okay, they're all listed as low risk, but I was just wondering whether there was, they seem fairly simple things. Is there appetite from taxi licensing to deal with these, or have they got lacking capacity, or do we know what the issue is?
I don't have a further update on these, but the fact that they have set themselves actions and action dates suggests there's an appetite to make the improvements that we've suggested to them. So it's just a case of they've not told us where they are with taking those actions at this point in time.
Thank you. I've got 3 questions, so do one at a time if that's okay. Could I just poke a little bit more on the transparency code for me? So, sort of 3 years to get to where we are. When I look at the summary of weaknesses on page 14 of the report, they all look really clear. So there's no oversight, no guidance, incorrect reporting, errors, no quality control. I don't understand how what seems quite transparent and obvious cannot have actions that can be agreed in 3 years. I just don't understand how we can be in that place. So that's not for you to answer, but I'd like to understand more around what the real barrier is for these things that seem quite straightforward from what I can read there, just not being progressed. That's question 1.
So yes, I think the start of this really is obviously a really complex data set. As you think, it's about payroll data, financials, and I think the start of the breakdown with this. So we did publish information. We implemented a new finance system. We struggled getting some of the spend data out there, reporting adequately enough to be able to comply with the transparency code. So that was one element of it. Whilst the finance system was adequate enough to produce a set of accounts, in which we have, there was issues there, and I think that was the start of that. So I think it's around the complexity of the data sets, and then I think the ownership of the data has been difficult across the organisation because it crosses multitude of sections and departments. I know the monitoring officer has picked this up personally that she's going to do. There's a lot of procurement data that feeds into that, but obviously she needs to work alongside myself and HR and all of those others that feed into this. So yeah, it's not made the progress has been identified in the report that we'd like to, but there is a commitment for the organisation that we feel that we are now getting that clean set of data suite to be able to report to this. I know the procurement team have been working on it recently. I've seen extracts of the data, but it is a really, really complex amalgamation of different data sets to be able to do that.
It just it would feel more prudent to me to actually have action dates when we want to try and get this done, rather than by risk accept it and throw it under the carpet. That's how it reads. And I think it's a far better practice to say, right, we'll have an action date to resolve this in a year, rather than just say, we'll risk accept it, personally.
We are working through those details of how we can achieve that. But again, it's around a priority of this against other issues that we've got. And, the monitoring officer made a decision that this wasn't the top of her list to be able to do with in terms of the risk that it posed to the organisation.
Okay. I'd just like my comments to be registered and noted. I think it's a limited assurance and it looks poor. Yeah.
Can I support that? I mean, Tommy's asked the questions that I was going to ask anyway. But I do feel like that, yes, rather than saying we're going to come up with a plan, it should be there is a plan, and this is the date, and this is the people responsible. So I would support that.
Councillor Kerr.
Can I put a bit of a twist on that, because this has clearly been something that has been worked on behind the scenes very hard for a long time. And I think we should welcome the fact this has now got to us so that we actually have something that we can monitor. So we can welcome the fact it's come to us, but we can also put pressure on the fact that it's not yet good enough.
Agreed. Councillor Wright.
Yeah, a couple of them. I would support the well, it's not recommendation, a observation that we need to do more on the overdue recommendations, but also ask this group to continue the work that it's done to support internal audit in doing that. And my second one is that there's a Parks and Open Spaces audit that's on the report said is 95% complete. There's a lot of money been invested in parks and open spaces in the last two budgets, and I, for one, would certainly be interested, subject to your agreement, Chair, that if we do have a deep dive in terms of a specific audit rather than a general overview, that's one. If that's not practical because of the size of the agenda next time or the size of the input from internal audit, I'd like to see that report so that we can, digest it myself and then report back if necessary. Thank you.
How's this as the way forward then? We ask for specific and detailed updates on those two matters for the next meeting. That request can be cascaded into the teams and hopefully that will prompt a more thorough response. Would that be an appropriate way forward? Did you have two more questions?
Yeah, so question two, thank you. Towards the back of your report, on page 27 and page 30, there's four notes that progress seems to have stalled on the place audits that we had a workshop in January, and there's four that there's comments that nothing's happened since that January meeting. And do you know why that is? I felt that having engaged with them in January would get into some momentum, but the result comments there suggest that that's stalled. I just wanted to ask you if you've got any views on that, Hannah?
I think what I would say is, obviously that meeting took place. We've subsequently then rolled out the K10 vision system to allow officers to do their updates within the system on these recommendations and to be able to monitor their own recommendations. And we still haven't had any further updates on those ones. So obviously we need to do a bit more pushing on those to try and get the engagement from officers so we can in turn bring you the information you need. I can't speak to why the officers haven't provided that information and those updates at this point in time, unfortunately.
Thanks, Hannah.
Okay.
Again, I found it disappointing that having got a special workshop in place in January that we haven't got, it's not followed through, and it just feels that, we're not making the progress again that I was hoping we would do. I know we've got a meeting next month with another directorate, but I think we should, don't know what the right words are, kick the...
unique set of circumstances. I feel like we might be able to get a comment on it. Sam, would you like to come in on that?
Thank you, Chair. For me, I believe so that they'll be from my directorate, and I believe they are within traffic and transportation. Is that right? So there's some of the more complex ones. So I know the officers are working them up, and just to give Chair and the committee some assurance, I've now got audit and governance outstanding actions on my monthly place DLT. So I know the work is being done to try and progress them, but I think we've had some challenges around resource and conflicting priorities at the moment. So you'll be aware that some of our team have moved into the combined authority as part of that. So it's left a bit of a gap in terms of having people within the traffic and transport team to deliver some stuff. So we're just working through. Verna's doing some work around that resource and the structure to make sure we've got people in roles who can progress this. But we are behind at the moment. We acknowledge that, but we're having some challenges at the moment with the gap left by the MCA move.
Thanks for the update. And it would spare you some trouble if officers would update Audit in advance of the meeting, but I appreciate the update today. Thank you. Is there one more?
Thank you. Third question. On the QAIP, that in previous months you've had that table about the plan. I didn't really understand 4.3 in the report that sort of said why we weren't getting it. And I also wondered if you could give some clarity about why we're not getting that plan this time and when we'll get it again, please.
Okay, so the QAIP came, I believe, to the March meeting, and that set out what we were going to be setting as our actions for the 25-26 financial year. Since then, we haven't had a refresh of that to say where we are against those items. So rather than just bringing you the same information you already received in March, I just felt it wasn't worthwhile putting that into this already quite long report. There are going to be CMAP operational group meetings, which is the kind of the prompt for revisiting where we are with those actions. Once those meetings have happened, I'll be able to bring you an update on where we are against the QAIP to hopefully the next meeting.
Personally, I prefer to see it.
Okay.
Because we agreed last time we put a column in that said last time something actually happened. And if we're seeing that things aren't happening for 6, 9, 12 months, it's something we can ask questions about rather than lose sight of.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any more queries? Somebody?
Just building on what Lucy mentioned about the taxi licensing position. The first recommendation there, safeguarding training was only delivered to new applications and training dates on the website was not current. So are we saying that there are taxi drivers out there who have not had safeguard training or not had current safeguard training? Because if that is the position, it's fairly fundamental for the assurance for people using taxis that drivers have properly been approved to be able to drive taxis. We don't want people driving around with taxis who have not been safeguard training. There may be other issues around taxi licensing, but that one just seems fairly critical to me. Not just, it's obviously moderate risk, I would suggest it's something more fundamental than that. But anyway, if that's the point they're making, I'm not sure.
The lower rating rather suggests to me it's a reporting matter rather than a real matter. Is that true?
It's down to that kind of audit trail in the evidentiary process rather than them not having had the training.
Would you like to come in on that?
Thank you, Chair. Just to let you know that obviously the new system, the K10 system, has now been rolled out, and my role as Director of Communities has got two halves. So I've got frontline services, and then I've got community safety neighbourhoods, which taxi licensing falls into. I've got a meeting this Thursday with the Street Pride side to go through those audit recommendations which are outstanding, and I've got a meeting next Thursday booked in with Pop and Neil, who are my community safety side, to go through them as well. So we are progressing those, and there'll be that check next week. Thank you.
Councillor Kerr.
There's a mention of the new IT makes me wonder how's the training for going? Are people actually feeling confident in using it from the sort of feedback inside? Have we done any sort of request as to whether people need additional training or online guidance? Or if it's not being used and we're not getting the feedback, maybe we need to have an open door for requests or something.
Yeah, so when I've done the training and when I went along to CLT to discuss the new system with everyone, I always say, if you have any questions, you need any support, then obviously come back to me. We did training. Everyone was issued with process guidance notes to help them to use the system as well. And the other thing that came out of our discussion at CLT was to give some access to the exec support officers so that they could also help the directors in providing updates and using the system. So they've also had their access rolled out and training and support given to them. So I feel like we've kind of extended that olive branch and said, if you need us, then obviously engage with us. And some officers have come back and said, can you help me with this particular part of the system? Or I've got a query here, and we've dealt with those. So I'm not sure what more we can do what's been offered.
So it's good that the offer's there. Are people actively suggesting that the lack of engagement is because of a training need, or?
That's not the feedback that I've had, no.
Okay.
Just to support that as well, so it's only been rolled out to directors, it hasn't gone, and the PA support, it hasn't gone to heads of service, so it's a limited cohort, so I think that's manageable for audit. And Hannah is scheduled to come into CLT space every quarter for updates, and I think you're due in the next couple of weeks.
I think it's sometime early September, I think.
Yeah, so there's that opportunity to talk to those people that are operating the system face to face. I'd imagine any training issues can be picked up with that regular contact.
Thank you. Councillor Kerr.
Maybe I'm being over-ambitious or optimistic here, but I thought that the thinking was that the people who are needing to make the decisions, probably heads of service, were going to have access to the new system so that they would be putting the feedback directly in here rather than leaving it with directors or their PAs to be doing. Am I wrong?
No, the actual input is at the director level. We did have a conversation at the corporate leadership team around the directors still being able to, because of the improvement that's needed with the recommendations, that it would be better if we had oversight directly with our heads of service. So a lot of us pick it up with our heads of service management team and go through the live data. But I think with the improvement that needed to make, we felt that we still needed to hold control of it.
Mr. Webster.
Thank you. Yes, also I had the same impression that it was heads of service committee doing the updates and directors monitoring it. But okay, let's see if it works. I mean, from what you said, K10 is recently rolled out, and hopefully we'll start seeing improvement in the figures, because the figures there on pages 20, 21 of the outstanding actions are still going up, and agreeing with a couple of other people, they still seem to be far too high. I did have another couple of specific questions on some of the recommendations. One on the end of, at the bottom of page 26, the report about deprivation of liberty, and the other one is management information in remote environment on page 29. And my question really is that there was the status update comments on both those actions. That's the same comment that's been received in this report ever since July 2024. So again, hopefully K10 will help improve that, but it does seem a long time. For the first one, it's for a policy document to be reviewed. The second one, there were some technical issues, and that's a long time for no progress.
I agree. The deprivation of liberty one, we are in the process of concluding a piece of audit work, and we have made some comments around the policy. Excuse me. The policy is part of that. It's very near completion, is my understanding, but officers haven't officially provided us with that update.
Thank you. Mr. Dolman. You must be delighted that I highlighted that to everybody. Are there any more queries or comments? Okay, thanks members. The recommendation in this case is to note the progress being made, review the control issues raised, and review the progress being made by management. Are we all happy that that is what we've done? Okay, thanks members. Next item on the agenda then is item number 11, which is the internal audit charter and mandate. We've all had a copy, and in this case, the recommendation is to review and approve the internal audit charter. Does anybody have any queries or comments? Can I consider that reviewed and agreed then? Excellent, thanks members. Moving on then, we are going to move item number 15, which is the committee work programme for 25-26, to discuss now. The recommendation here is to agree the work programme. Does anybody have any queries or comments on the work programme?
Just to say, I didn't receive a copy of that with the papers that went out, so it wasn't part of the pack. Not in the post, anyway.
Apologies,
So I've not been able to review that.
It wasn't materially different from one you'll have seen before, if that helps.
Yeah, I think what's been shown by David, it was dated 11th of June, so it's probably the same as last time. I don't know for sure.
Definitely not materially different then. Okay, thank you. All right, well, if we're happy to agree the work programme, with the exception of members who've not had a copy, then we can take that as agreed. Okay, item number 12 then is to exclude the public and press from the meeting, to their bitter disappointment, I'm sure. The motion then, members, is that under section 100A part 4 of the Local Government Act of 1972, the public be excluded from the meeting during the discussion of the following business on the grounds that it involves the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraph 3, part 1, schedule 12A of the Act, that is information relating to the financial and business affairs of the local authority. The public interest in maintaining the exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information. Are we all okay to move out of committee in public? Thank you.